I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? Okay, yay, we get to talk about that first debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and past President Donald Trump. So much that was to see as you're watching. So let me know what your thoughts are.
I almost want you to go first.
Nope. You first.
First. In the interest of, because I know we could probably talk about this for hours and hours, so I'll try to be brief. I was not surprised by anything. Neither one of them said anything that felt new or made me go, oh, I hadn't thought about that before, or I guess I was surprised by the fact checking that the commentators did. I was appreciative, although it was pretty minuscule and not full-throated. At least it existed, so I was happy to see that. I still would love to see these debates with a chyron, a fact-checking chyron. I know we have the technology. I'm imagining,
Yeah, okay.
debates spin rooms where they have all the surrogates and all the people that are thinking about how to spin the things that the candidates say after it's over. I'm thinking they have a room full of fact checkers and they just on the chyron say, well, actually, no, we're not aborting babies after they're born because that would be murder. And no, we're actually not.
That would be entirely too logical.
I know, but if anybody out there that manages these debates is listening out there, just putting that bug in your ear, I would love to see that. So I was appreciative that they fact checked even a little bit. But they fact checked him, which I get. He lies every time his mouth moves, but they didn't fact check her, which I was. I would
okay.
get both
Cognizant.
sides. Because she, spouted off some untruths that have been fully debunked about, sexual assault happening on October 7th and beheaded babies and yada, yada, yada. And all that stuff has been debunked and they didn't push back on that. So we're one step closer to the commentators actually doing the work that all of us that are watching are screaming at the TV going, so that was something. It's interesting. I had an occasion at the gym to have, they have all kinds of TVs up with all different channels. And so and of course, no sound. So all I'm seeing is headlines and chyrons. And so it's interesting to see the different takes, the things that the mainstream media was focusing on after this debate, things like her facial expressions, and how, her facial expressions, his, they didn't really talk a lot about the lies that he told because, there were just too many, but they did.
It was ridiculous.
Absolutely.
Things that were coming out of his mouth were like,
although
ridiculous.
Some relatively like truth adjacent statements, like when he talks about truth adjacent. I just made that up. When
I like it though.
He talked about how
giving him such honor.
I know. Well, because and to me, truth adjacent is he made a true statement, but it wasn't because he intended to make a true statement. It just so happened that it kind of was true, and regardless, right? So yeah, like when he said that she didn't have any economic policies and those kinds of things, she didn't come out with. I would have liked to have heard more policy speak. I spoke to my young person about it because she watched, and I was curious to her, and she was like, well, she talked about policies and he didn't, and she talked about this. And I said, well, tell me about the policies that you heard about. So she told me, there were two economic policies that she wanted to thing, the child tax credit and then some housing credit or whatever. She talked about, signing Roe v. Wade back in, but didn't say codifying, which I think is important. Codifying is the terminology that we have all been talking about that could have been done long ago and wasn't. Um, so I didn't hear a lot of policy speak. I saw a lot of gotcha comments coming from both sides. Um, she did the gotcha stuff better than Joe Biden did, so kudos to her for that. She stayed on her feet. She spoke in complete sentences. He looked like a raving um, not trying to be ableist, but person unwell. Which wasn't, none of it was surprising. And yeah, so that's my initial take on my observations without going
Okay,
into.
so I had a without going, sorry, into detail, I was getting the end of what you're about to say.
I just said
Um,
not going into too much detail. So
yeah. You made a statement about there's all kinds of stuff that's like memes and things that are popping up that they were focusing on. What was one of the ones that caught your attention like the most? Because I have one that I'm going to share that just has me giggling so hard. So, what's yours?
well, one. I don't know that I could speak to one. And also too, I'm not sure of what you're asking, like something that shocked
Okay,
me, that, I wasn't surprised that he brought up the Haitian conspiracy theory of eating dogs that's happening right now. I was not
not
surprised
okay.
at all. I appreciated, um, I appreciated the fact checking that the commentator tried, or the moderator tried to do, by
Hmm.
telling that no, actually that's false. And he kept pushing,
Hmm.
you know, so yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious to see what stuck out for you because none of it surprised me. It all was just, same old, same old.
So I opened Instagram today, and one of the first things was the Shade Room, which is kind of a social media space
Okay.
where folks show up and really do kind of pop culture-ish type information.
Okay.
And the first thing that they had was that moment in the debate when Kamala wanted to call him an MFer, and this uh, president, former president, is like what she got out, but
Yeah.
in a cultural context, it was, and this motherfucker over here, excuse my language, but like that's what like culturally happened. And she had to readjust herself to get back into um a presidential stance.
Yeah.
And so it was a very funny moment that a lot of folks picked up on. And then it was really funny that, and I'm glad the Shade Room did this
Mhm.
because it means that they are paying attention to what the political climate is, because normally their information is very much like social relationships and stuff like that. So it's very I'm so excited that they're actually even putting up jokes about what's happening with our political system, because that's making people comment, because there are some really intelligent comments that go through the stream. So that was funny for me. And it also made me, when I'm watching the debate, I already have the expectation that we're not going to get to policy and all of that, especially because of our political climate. So I'm really looking at like what the dynamics are and kind of like the dog whistles that both of them might be making. I'm like looking at that. And I'm also looking at, and because you brought this up for me, like how they are framing the narrative in a way to sway American voters,
Mhm.
um, and and how both of our political actors are playing into that
Right.
um, on this very global stage at this point.
Mhm.
Uh, I it also made me realize that I've grown up with Donald Trump very visibly
Mhm.
um, in my life. So being able to like watch, because I watched the shows back in the day and stuff. Donald Trump has always been a very large brand, um, in my generation.
Yeah.
And so being very used to like seeing his facial expressions and where he is with something. And the one thing about Donald Trump that I have always observed is that he respects and gets like a kick out of like any powerful person gets a kick out of like when there is an actual challenge. And so he had that facial expression like, okay, she's coming.
Uh-huh.
She's coming for me. Like, and that was really affirming that like that's what I noticed from like if you're thinking about like the history of when Donald Trump, even when he was doing the show, and somebody says something, he's like, okay. She was doing that. And so I appreciated that level of like kind of underlying recognition of the value, even though he's never going to do that up front. You can pay attention to people's body language and things like that and kind of understand the other forms of communication that are existing. And with that being said, I'm also thinking just looking at the social dynamics of how these things happen, how he's so masterful of taking up space. And that was literally driving me bananas because he was so tactical in not answering the questions so he would have more time to take time to talk about things that he wanted to so that he knew that they would have to keep on asking him over and over and over again, giving him time and then not giving Kamala the same time. And then there was also like this engagement between the two women, how they were interacting with each other, and where the comfort was of like cutting Donald Trump off. It always went to this the man had to like make it happen. And there, so all of those like little negotiations, like sitting there and watching that, that's where the tension comes in my body because though that level of the communication are the narratives that the spin rooms, and I didn't even know that there was something called a spin room, but
Oh,
that
yeah.
the spin rooms are playing on.
Mhm.
Those are the narratives that they keep on amplifying. And
Mhm.
it just makes me really want to remind everyone to go and read the legislation that's going on and not be moved by this really, caricature show that we are experiencing specifically with this election because they've gotten really good at knowing our algorithms to know what is going to sway and move us. And they are both of they are playing on that tremendously. Like it's a very high vibration of we already know what you're thinking and what you
Mhm.
need. Like Kamala Harris is a prosecutor. She has a history of prosecuting major cases on a kind of global context, even.
Mhm.
And she was playing the auntie role. That was weird.
Yeah.
That was just a weird thing to like watch and be like, oh my goodness, okay, this is what we have to do to kind of like tap in
Well,
to,
yeah,
engage people.
that brings up a
Very
question
thing.
for me, based on kind of what we've talked about before about perceptions of Black women in our culture. Um, it's so interesting that you just said that she has this skill set. And I'm watching the chyrons and they're talking about her facial expressions. I mean,
Hmm.
most of the time she was looking at him like she was looking at a toddler. And so, and I remember looking at the what I was seeing on the TVs at the gym today, and I remember seeing or thinking to myself, you know, it would have served her, even though I totally get why she was looking at him like that. Any of us would. It would have served her not to necessarily look at him like that because that's a trope that that people expect women to be aggressive and all of these things. And so I was watching the chyrons thinking, oh, it fed into that, because they were talking about her facial expressions. Who gives a shit about her facial expressions? So but what's
And
interesting,
everyone gives facial expressions during the debates. Let me just say that. Like if we're everyone, but what
I
the
was
focal point
watching
needs to be.
watching live last night with Amanda Seales, she's multifaceted social justice actress, many levels of things that she's involved in. And I'm a follower of her on Patreon. And she offered to her Patreon followers, she calls us her SEAL Squad, to watch the debate live through a YouTube. So she's watching it and we're all commenting and chatting and stuff. And she was saying, and somebody said in the chat at one point, they said he is so mad, but he's got so much makeup on, you can't even tell his face is red. I mean, you're right. He cannot control his, his impulses to shoot back. But it's interesting that you talked about her being an auntie instead of a prosecutor. And does that feed, we've talked before about the different perceptions of Black women. Is that the mammy role that they want people to see her in instead of the prosecutor role, because that just feeds the Black women are aggressive, I mean, all of those things, all of those tropes. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know that she could have done anything differently last night that would have created a different spin. Because I think just by virtue of being a Black woman, she was going to be picked apart by her delivery and her all of those things regardless. And I think you're right that it was a choice to have a white man and a Black woman as the moderators. They cut his mic more than they cut her mic, which makes sense in a lot of ways because she's got more self-discipline to actually finish her remarks when she's supposed to instead of the bloviating that he gets into when he just gets on a roll. So I was appreciating that they were actually using the mic cut thing to cut him off, because of course you could still hear him, feed through her mic. Did you notice in the beginning when they were first coming out, the moderator said the candidates flipped a
I
coin
missed that part.
and Kamala chose to be on the right side podium? They said that out loud. And I'm thinking, why would anybody care which podium they were sitting at? And that's another choice. I pay attention to those little details anymore.
Yeah,
Like,
production. Yeah,
why would that even be a thing,
yeah.
And
That's an underlying conversation and like kind of production and positioning, power
right.
positioning that is
And there was no
that
audience
we're not aware of. Yeah,
as an audience because he feeds off of their energy. So I remember hearing that that was one of the things he was putting the brakes on. He didn't want he wanted to have an audience because that feeds his, his ridiculousness.
he's an entertainer.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it was total entertainment.
He's an
And
entertainer.
and so I wish that we lived in a world where they did feel compelled to talk about policy, that it wasn't just about entertainment, that it wasn't just about because ain't nobody got, I mean, I was so triggered by just hearing his voice in succession for an hour and a half after 4 years of dealing with it before that I was going to say PTSD, and I'm trying to be mindful of not declaring that to belittle it in people that really experience it, but there is a trigger reaction that I
I mean
have.
that is what it is. I mean,
Yeah,
right? Let's just name it what it is, because
yeah,
there's a trigger reaction from him.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do feel that. Afterwards, I listened to two things. I listened to Jill Stein's rebuttal. She did
Mm,
a webinar kind of Zoom rebuttal, and so I listened to that. And then I switched over to YouTube to listen to Mark Lamont Hill, who had three guests on his show, and I guess they had live watched the debate
the
together with
show is off.
option.
Nice.
I kind of came
Do you remember who the people were?
discussion. Oh, that's, you see, I knew you were going to ask me
Okay,
that. I know
that's fine.
there was a gentleman on there was a gentleman on there named Deontay.
Uh-huh.
He, I think, presented as a conservative. He was the conservative voice on the panel.
Okay, fine.
There was a gentleman named David who was very open about his LGBTQ status and was very upset with,
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
apparently Deontay and David had been going at it before I came in, because Deontay didn't believe that David had a right to have rights. And then there was a woman named Tiffany who was based, she said she was based in Atlanta, and I
Mm,
never got to hear their introduction, so I don't know what her, um, well, she has a podcast, I think, and she brought some really interesting commentating thought-provoking commentating to the dialogue, talking about young people and what did we think they got from this debate, and
Mhm.
you know, I asked my young person a little bit about that too. So so yeah, that was my progression of the night. And so by the time, you know, I went to bed, I was pretty fried, but I feel like I got like several voices and platforms and maybe perspective.
Perspectives.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that was helpful in me trying to process you know, the filth and flurry that I had to watch for.
Captain Flurry. There we got it. Yeah. Um, yeah, so I watched the debate, and then I also was in like text communication with somebody who has a completely different perspective from me, identifies as white, male, and Jewish. And so, you know, we were having banter back and forth, you know, in critique of what both of them were doing. And it was a fun engagement to be having that banter back and forth. So it made it more fun to be having an adult banter back and forth.
Yeah.
Um, watching this. And yeah, then I started like to take notes on some of like the critical topics that they were skirting. I am going to um, say that neither of them, in my opinion, really answered the questions in the way that would be informative to allow us voters to be making decisions about what we could look forward to and the person who holds the office. So
A lot
that
of,
was a bit
a lot of,
frustrating, a lot of frustration.
yeah.
And then I was particularly disappointed in it feeling like Kamala skirted how she's shifted in what her policy positions have been in the past,
Okay.
right? When asked about that. And
Yeah.
so it would have been really helpful for me to just hear the processing of how she came to it, like to have a pathway for us to like be able to walk down it with you. So it doesn't seem like you will just switch up, you
Yeah.
know, for purpose.
Yeah.
Um, and then there was also, I didn't think that there was a strong voice in regards to if you've been the person in office for 4 years and you've been developing policy and legislation with Joe Biden,
Mhm.
and that is a part of what you're bringing into your platform, have strong voice about it. Like stand on your square about what it is that you've been working on because you've been working on it. And I thought that that was really interesting. I didn't understand that, you know, there was that point in the debate where it was like, you are not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. So I understand that we do have to begin to see Kamala Harris acting in the presidency apart from Joe Biden. I understand that that's a narrative that has to like start to sink in. Um, and so she did it clearly in that moment. And then there was also just kind of like back up your work, stand on your square on what you've been doing, and just like hold fast to it because that to me is presidential. Be flexible to hear other people's perspective, but let us know how you've gotten to where you've gotten so that we know what we're working with.
Yeah, I brought this up in a previous dialogue with you that I feel like, I mean, I get that she's in a unique circumstance, right? She hasn't been the person that's been in the role. She's running for election on a re-elect year, right? And she's been in proximity and been in the administration, but not necessarily the decision maker. So there's that. And then she's running against someone who has been president, was president for 4 years, hasn't been right now, but was. And so yeah, it's a very unique circumstance. What I get frustrated with is the flip-flopping for me in 1 minute she's got all this power and she's done all this work that she can stand on her square and say, I did this. But then the next minute, well, I'm just the vice president. That's Joe Biden's platform. I wasn't in charge of all of that. And so I'm willing to concede that it's a difficult, it's I think it would be safe to say that it's a really challenging nuance to manage, and I don't know that anybody else has had to manage this. And so she's definitely in uncharted territory, I would think. And yeah, I mean, she has to say, I was a part of this administration that I believe in, but I'm also going to do it differently than him. And that's the place where I feel like she missed a mark last night. And maybe that's, I'm agreeing with you on that, is that she didn't take the time to say, this is what I want to see happen. She did it, she touched on it a couple of different things, but and if the drinking word was migrants or immigration, we would all have been drunk within 10 minutes because he couldn't talk about anything else. He kept pivoting over to immigration because that was the only thing his brain was, those were the talking points that he had. And so everything became about
Because
immigration.
he knows what the hot topic is to focus on, and he knows how to throw out the seeds of discontent, right? And he was, and with that, he's able. What, and all of that makes me think of, we become who we are in the environments.
Mm,
Donald Trump is he's a masterful manipulator. He has a super skill
yeah.
with that. So he was really able, like, if we back up, and this is, I think, one of the games that I'd like to play in the course of us having this conversation, maybe we can move on to that like in the next 5 minutes. But like identifying like all of the tropes and the narratives that we saw popping out like through the day. It would be really good if we had like that cool production where we could like visually show you what we're talking about. But
I'll work on
would be
that.
very magical about about describing.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I'd love to play that game. But like he was really able to like drive responsiveness from her. Like so there was definitely jabbing with each other, but he was definitely able to like get her to be in some responsiveness to something so outrageously ridiculous that he came out of his mouth with, that if she did not respond to it, we would all be like, how could you not have responded to that level of ridiculousness? So
Right.
it is, again, the Black woman having to like do double time, because she couldn't just have a conversation with this human being about policy. She had to also be like, do you recognize what you just said, Mr.
Killing the baby
former president?
is murder, not abortion. And
Do you know what I mean? So
okay
there
with
was
that.
a lot of that. So that's a lot of like
Yeah.
and that, I mean, if we're talking about having a presidential skill to be able to be that way, and then also have to kind of manipulate the complexities of the environment that you're adjusting to, like happens when you are a Black woman in the United States. She's doing that in the way that we always have to do that. And it is a labor, no matter what we're talking about in regards to this election.
And I would have liked it if the
That woman is laboring, and she has had to labor for her entire career.
yeah. And I think the moderators, I keep calling them commentators, the moderators could have taken some of that labor off of her shoulders if they,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, if they had
And they weren't.
said, actually, no, that's not, and they did a little bit, but they
Mhm.
did at the level. Now, granted, had they done that for every lie that came out of his mouth, we would have never heard her speak because it
All the
would have
time.
him and them go. So I get that there's a middle ground that maybe we haven't. That's why the Chiron, I'm telling you, everybody that needs to be listening to this, do the Chiron so that the moderators don't even have to voice it. It could just be on there. And what would be beautiful about it is that the candidates couldn't even see the Chiron, so he wouldn't even get triggered that he's being pushed back on, because
Yeah.
right there, we'd end up reading the Chiron, not listening to what they're saying, which wouldn't be a bad thing.
I
So
think you've just started your new business. So for anyone who is listening, you do need to check in with Deanne Tate and go back as the originating idea and make sure that she gets her flowers and her funds for coming up with this. It could also be, I'm going to add my little 2 cents onto it. It could also be that we get text messages. So if we're not getting this from news media, one of the organizing and mobilizing social justice organizations out there, or fact-checking organizations out there, and oh God, if it comes down to like our meta people and all that, but we can get dings to our phones that we could sign in to get like dings to our phone that would give us the facts, and we could source the facts from different people. So
do
there
you
we go. We just created it. Soros, Ford,
know
come on now, let's make it happen.
back in the day in MTV where they would do the quick facts or
Hmm.
the pop-up facts in the thought bubbles that I
In the
would like
thought
to see
bubbles.
bubbles, not just the Chiron. That would be boring, but the thought bubbles would be funny.
I love it. Let's get some thought bubbles up there, y'all. Thought bubbles.
Yeah. I love your idea about doing the game about tropes and things that we heard, and maybe we can do that in the next episode, because I think that is super valuable, because we all know the shit show that we're watching, and it's helpful to be able to unpack it a little bit and really decipher like what we're seeing. So yeah, tune in to the next episode. That should be fun.
Why do I give a fuck?
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a fuck?
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.